are kicking off a terrific series of Q&As with a very, very talented actor who is sitting to my left, your right. He made his film debut in a small independent film some of you may have heard of called E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. You know him from Red Dawn, Wolverines, The Outsiders, The Hitcher, The Amazing Spider-Man. Can we talk about Spider-Man?
Yes.
We can talk about Spider-Man today. He is also the voice of Professor Zoom, a ton of other roles. Let's give a very terrific TerrifiCon welcome to C. Thomas Howell.
I like this COVID-friendly setting here.
Yes. I asked people if they would like to move up because I feel like
they're
I'm screaming at
we're
people.
10 feet, 10 feet.
Yes, we need to make our exits to wherever the food stands are. Look, I could probably go on and on about your resume all day long. Do you ever get tired of talking about your resume?
You know, it's funny because I love to connect with people. But when they say, oh, you have a panel, I'm like, God, man, I want to go talk about myself for 40 minutes, you know. There's nothing more, like, pathetic than listening to an actor talk about himself. But you know, having grown up in the business, you're in people's lives. You know, I'm 57 and I started when I was 13. So I meet a lot of people my age, and they instantly turn into a 13-year-old little girl. You know, and
is that what I've done to you right now?
Well, you know, that's what these shows are for, right? And I just have a thing with actors or performers that come to these shows and try to remove themselves from the people, and it really bothers me when they do that, when that's why we're here. So when somebody comes to my table, I try to connect, I try to be present, and it's really not about an autograph, it's about the moment that you're sharing, and if you're aware of that, I walk away with a full heart as well. So, you know, these people come to see me, but I come to see them. And with that attitude, it makes it a much better experience for me as well. So, you know, having grown up in the business, and again, I've been fortunate enough to have been in, you know, 250 productions, some of them great, some of them not great. Right. But to see where people have connected with me is always sort of fun, you know, whatever the project is.
Well, many of them too, not just good or great, but receiving cult status, iconic status. I mean, you've been in many of those. What do people scream out at you most? I mean, are they screaming Wolverines?
You know, I'm getting Stay Gold, Wolverines, a lot of people, a lot of Reaper fans.
Okay.
Criminal Minds.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm still, like, I'm a working actor, right? I've got a show called Obliterated on Netflix right now. I just started a new series with Harrison Ford called 1923 with Taylor Sheridan. I'm working on that right now. So, you know, for me, I'm blessed because I have a history in the business, but I'm still present.
Yeah.
So I don't come here resenting being called Pony Boy. You know, it could be worse. I could have been, you know, Gilligan or Chachi, right? So,
not that there's anything wrong with Gilligan or Chachi.
No, but I'm just saying, you know, if somebody's shouting Chachi over and over, you might be like, oh, Jesus, I've done other things. Yeah. But, you know, The Outsiders is something that's near and dear to my heart. My wife and I started a foundation called the Stay Gold Foundation, where we go to schools and we talk about the importance of literacy. And, you know, young kids are so caught up into social media, there's no beginning, middle, and an end anymore. There's just a 15-second swipe left. And their attention spans and even their socializing skills are pretty much nil. And when I was a kid, you know, communication was a big thing. Storytelling was a big thing. Just mustering up the courage to go ask Mia LaCroix out to the dance in 8th grade took me 4 days to do, you know. Now, they're in the middle of a video game, the TV's on, they're doing homework, and they'll ask Mia LaCroix if she'll go to the dance. She says no, they swipe left, and it never happened to her back to video games. For me, it wrecked me when she said no. You know, it's character-building stuff. It's important. Right. So, you know, the art of storytelling and communication is fading, and it's important for me to get out there and talk to these kids. You know, 10 years ago, I'd go to a class, and I'd ask, you know, if there was anybody interested in the arts, and I'd get half the class to raise their hands. Now, none of them do. So everybody wants to be an influencer. People ask me, how can I be famous? But nobody asks how they can, what it is that they can do, what kind of effort or what kind of work they can do to become whatever it is they want to become, a writer, a songwriter, an actor, a storyteller, something of that sort. They're not interested anymore.
They want the shortcut. They want to be.
They just want to be.
Well, how do you approach that then? Because I mean, my wife and I have talked about that a lot too. Is that, I mean, back in the day, we had to figure things out. If we wanted to know something, we had to go look it up. We had to go to the library.
Well, that's the tough part, because now these kids got all the answers in their pocket in that device, and that's a conversation killer. Because before, you could sit there and argue about a movie that took place in the 80s, and have a good time while you're talking about it. But now the phone comes out, and the fact is blurted out, and the conversation's killed instantly. So it's a different time.
Right. Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes gave it this, so there's the answer to that. It's like,
sure.
no, let's debate. I want to
Wait, who
debate
played
about
that role? Was that Harrison Ford? No, it wasn't Harrison. Yes, it was Harrison. No, it wasn't. Yes, no, it wasn't. You're wrong.
It's a blessing and a curse, because sometimes I do need to figure things out in a moment's notice. But again, to this point, it's like, have we lost critical thinking? Have we lost the ability to just figure stuff out? So, man, how do you? Just curious.
Well, how do you? When we were younger, finding an answer was a beautiful moment. We did a book report, and we needed the L encyclopedia, and somebody had to check that. Like, holy shit! And you'd have to wait.
Go to the library.
But finally, you get an answer. It was like a celebration. But there's no more of that.
You mentioned
kids can't even cursive write. When I sign things, they'll be like, "What does that say?" I'm like, "This is stay gold. What's wrong with you?" You know what I mean?
You're still
they can't even read it.
Are you printing now? Do you have to?
It's no. Of course, it's motivated me to continue cursive writing, but
more and more. Okay.
Unless they're using their thumbs, they can't read it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, a whole different.
Anyway, I digress.
I know. Two old dudes up here.
Yeah.
It's barking.
We're like alone here.
No, that's fine. Well, look, if this is the best place to be. You mentioned one of the series you're working on now, 1923. I meant, my full disclosure, my wife and I watched the first season, and my God, I mean, we got so wrapped up in it. And then when you see Harrison Ford and you see him in that type of role that we want to see him in, but television is so different today. I mean, it used to be like you'd have a series, you'd have to have 23 episodes, it's every week. Now you're putting out the storytelling, I think, is tighter.
Yeah.
I think you can put those things out, but my goodness, the wait in between seasons, it's like...
And you only get 8 episodes.
Right. Can you, and you binge them, and then you go through, and then we got to wait for this. Can you give us anything? How far in to production are you? Can you give us anything about your experience?
Well, the interesting thing about this show is that we don't shoot them in order.
Okay.
So there's 8 episodes.
Script's all done.
Like, I'm starting on number 5, but I come in earlier, but I'm just saying my first scene is scene 5. So the scripts are all in. Back in the day, of course, you never shoot anything in order, but for example, The Outsiders, we tried to shoot it in some sort of sequence, and from the beginning to the end. But it's all about the dollar now and locations, and at least for us, and a lot of times, like when I was on Southland, which I did for 5 years, you'd get your script, but they we're still writing 2 or 3 scripts ahead. This is locked in, and
you have everything all at once, so you can know the whole story.
Sheridan is up doing Yellowstone in Montana. We're down in Texas.
Okay. Oh, you're actually filming.
So he's doing 2 or 3 things at once. He's getting the John Benet Ramsey show up and going. He's doing that. I mean, the guy is so prolific. I mean, he's got, was it Tulsa King?
Yep. And I think that's coming back for another season.
It's coming back, and what's the Jeremy Renner show? King of, right?
Yep.
Mayor of Kingstown.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy, you just go, how are you doing this? And I'll tell you, the crew is the happiest crew you've ever met because they bounce from show to show to show.
Okay.
And in general, Hollywood is like burning to the ground right now. Nobody is working. So if you're on a Taylor Sheridan show,
that's it.
You're pretty stoked.
So, but you've got all the scripts. You've read everything. You know what happens to your character. I mean,
I've got all the scripts that I'm in.
Okay.
So I'm not in every. I'm not in all 8. So I know what's going on as far as the storyline that I'm a part of.
Okay. Can you give us anything about your character at all?
I play a rancher, and that's pretty much all I'm gonna.
That's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I get it. I'm seeing the look too. I'm seeing the mustache.
Well, I learned once because you want to talk about Spider-Man. Here's a Spider-Man story.
We'll do Spider-Man.
So I got hired to do this sort of small role, which took like 5 weeks of shooting for 10 minutes of footage, and of course you get this phone book that you have to sign your life away of all the things that you will or will not do. And, of course I just signed it. Did I read it? No, I'm an actor. So Spider-Man's about to come out, and I get invited to go do this sort of interview on a local radio show in Los Angeles. And they start asking me some questions, and they say, can you tell me about your character? And I say, I played the father of this young kid who gets caught up in between this mini battle on this bridge, the Washington Bridge or something in New York. And I said, Spider-Man and the Lizard are going at it. And they go, wait, what? Oh. And I was like, what? And they said, did you say the Lizard? And I was like, yeah. Well, that went viral instantly because they had not announced who the supervillain was, of course, and I got 50 phone calls from Sony and all the lawyers, and they're like, what are you doing? And it was like, I still didn't even really understand what I did until I got in the car. My agent called me, he goes, what the hell did you just do? I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, what did you say? I said, I didn't say anything, and it took me a minute to figure it out. I was like, oh, shit. At San Diego Comic-Con, like in 2 weeks, and I had just popped the top off of it. So, needless to say, they weren't happy, but thank God all those people are fired, and Sony loves me again because I just did Obliterated for them.
There was a little shake-up there.
So that executive turnstile is pretty constant, but I've learned to shut my mouth.
But it's interesting you say that too, because like back in the day, and by the way, if you guys, I could fanboy out for the next 30 minutes or so, but like if you guys have questions, there's a microphone over here, so.
Or just blurt it out.
Or just whatever you need. I mean, well, we would like to hear this. I'm getting yelled at by the audio guys. Use the mic if you can. But yeah, if you guys have some questions, head on over, but I can riff and I can fanboy out. But it's like, back in the day, that wasn't a big problem. You didn't have to worry about those things, but then it's like the Marvel.
You didn't have the internet.
You didn't have the internet? I remember I interviewed John Wesley Shipp, and it was like right before Legends of Tomorrow premiered, and he was at a con like maybe a week before they announced the title, and he had said it. Yeah. And it was the same thing, his phone blew up, and he was just like, this is all different. It's a different way of looking at things.
Well, it's an interesting thing, because they ask you questions, and you answer them as you would. And really, you probably shouldn't be in the chair. So it's a funny thing. A lot of times they'll say,
you learn quickly, right?
Well, they say you can take pictures, but you can't post them until episodes run and things like that. Okay. But at that point, it's like, a year later, you've done 2 other projects, right? And you've forgotten everything, and you don't even want to post that anymore.
No, it's 2 years ago, right?
It takes all the fun out of it.
But you've worked with Harrison Ford?
Not yet.
Okay, all right.
Not yet.
All right, you're looking. Are you a Harrison Ford fan?
A huge Harrison Ford fan.
Yeah, like a Han Solo, Indiana Jones. Like you're like, that's
American Graffiti.
Yeah. Okay. So can you turn
The Future is probably my favorite.
Can you turn fanboy off and then?
Well,
pretty quick. Okay.
Because you have to understand, he was married to Melissa Matheson when she wrote E.T., and that was my first picture. So there's, having grown up in the business, it's a little different for me because. I go on a set. If I'm a guest star of a show, usually that's the worst job to have in the business, because most actors, they show up as a guest star and they're eating alone and they're not talking to anybody, and it's pretty isolating. But I've spent 45 years in this business, so I'm 57. Generally, we have crossed paths somewhere.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised, there's a lot of Outsiders fans, and
Oh, yeah.
I'm invited into the lunch room, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So
And everybody's in that fight, too.
and I've probably worked with a lot of people that you have worked with, even though we haven't met, and it's a small business, so Hollywood's a small town.
So it really should be 6 degrees of separate of C. Thomas Howell.
Pretty much.
That should be the
Pretty
thing
much.
too.
Yeah.
And Harrison Ford filmed a scene in E.T. You weren't there for that though.
I don't recall that.
He was the principal. Deleted scene. They're like,
Wait,
oh, everybody's
was he
gonna go
in
Harrison. When the chair rises,
And the
Elliot.
frogs and all that.
Right after that, and they had a.
He got cut out?
He got cut out.
That's
at E.T.
awesome.
Yeah. So all right, we're gonna take some audience questions here. Can you tell us your name and where you're from?
Russ from Connecticut. Do you have any memories you can share with us during the filming of The Outsiders?
The Outsiders, yes.
Especially with the ensemble cast.
Well, that was, I think we shot it in 82, and most of us, it was pretty much our first thing. A couple of people had done a few things. I had done E.T., and Matt Dillon had worked a little bit, and I think Cruz had done Taps, and, we were all just kind of young kids, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. But, I haven't gone through anything like that prior or after. The auditioning process alone was unlike anything we had gone through. Normally, and things have changed again since COVID, but normally when you would audition for something, you would go to an office and there'd be 10 or 12 people all waiting outside with their papers, running lines, waiting to go into the doorway to meet a casting director or whoever was running the show, and you would give your audition and hope you got invited back. Well, in this instance, we went to Zoetrope Studios, and there would be, 30 actors all on stage 8, and Francis had created a little set, and there was everybody from Robert Downey Jr., Dennis Quaid, Val Kilmer, Mickey Rourke, Anthony Michael Hall. I mean, the list went on and on and on and on. And we were all in this room watching everybody work, and he would just be pointing and saying, okay, you're going to play Derry, you're going to play Dallas, Tommy, you play Ponyboy, do scene 4, and we'd all be working together. And it didn't really have a real sense of any kind of an audition. It was more of a workshop, environment. And literally, I went to 6 different cities and must have read with 1,000 different actors before they came up with that core group. And the last stop was New York, where we picked up Diane Lane and Matt Dillon. Of course, Ralph was from New York, but we nabbed him out of Los Angeles because he was doing a show called 8 is Enough at that point. And that final core group that we put together had spent a good 2.5 months working together at these auditions, and we knew each other quite well by the end of it. And of course, Patrick Swayze and I had done 3 pictures together. We did The Outsiders and Grandview, U.S.A. and Red Dawn. But what most people don't know is prior to The Outsiders, when I was 11 years old, I spent a summer in Houston on a set called Urban Cowboy. My father was the stunt coordinator of that film, and a woman named Patsy Swayze was the dance choreographer of that film. And I spent a summer with Patrick, who took care of me for my father down in Houston. So when we started working together, I had already known him and his family for a couple of years, so he was really like a true brother to me, and one of the most amazing, giving, gifted actors that I had the privilege of working with. Down to earth, super kind, and also a little bit of a pain in the ass. He was such a gifted artist and an athlete. He just naturally was better than anybody at anything in the room. I mean, you literally walk up to him and say, look, I just got a brand new butterfly net. I'm going to start catching butterflies. And he'd be like, oh, I went to the Olympics in butterfly catching in '68. And you'd look it up and the guy was like, wanted to write a song and went #1. He did a dance movie. It became one of the most epic dance films. Dirty Dancing is, pop culture, Americana, amazing stuff. He rode motorcycles. He wanted to be a cowboy. He started collecting horses, and whatever he focused on, he became an aficionado, and just a superb gentleman, man. But thank you for your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
What did you learn from Coppola on that film? Because such an early role. I'm sure you just.
He was a complicated man,
Yeah.
He was part psychologist, part director, part father, part friend, and he directed without overtly directing you. He has this knack of getting what he wants, but allowing you to think that you came up with the idea, which is the best way to do it.
Yes.
Because then you can take ownership of what it is you're trying to do, as opposed to trying to please somebody else.
Right.
And he did something that I had never experienced before. And back in the early 80s, video assist wasn't a thing. Now they use video on every film, and the director can replay video and take a look at a shot and say, okay, now we need this, now we need that. But back then it didn't exist. So he brought us in 4 weeks early, and we shot the entire film on videotape, which they edited and screened for us before we ever rolled film.
Whoa.
And there was a sense of competition between the greasers and the socias, because every weekend we would have, a barbecue at the park and a football game or a basketball game or bowling night, and they'd show up in their matching tracksuits with names on the back, and we didn't have shit. They had these matching leather binders, and they were on the 18th floor of the hotel getting more per diem than us, and we really had this sense of, and it was healthy, of course, but, well, let's just put it like this. The scene on the monkey bars when I spit on Leif Garrett, I may or may not have blown a line or two to do that a few more extra times. And it was a healthy, competitive hatred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was what he was doing.
That was built in. And of course, none of us really understood that's what he was doing, but it also created a bond between us as actors. So when we were hanging out together, there was a trust. I love those guys. I wanted to be Matt Dillon. Now you're hanging out with a group of these young kids, 18, 19 years old, the outsiders. There's a couple of good-looking guys in that group. You know what I mean? But when you walked into a room with everybody, when Matt walked in, it was like the women fainted, man. When Matt was 18, 19 years old, he had this charisma that was inexplicable. He had sort of this James Dean, Marlon Brando kind of old movie star quality to him. And he was from New York, and I was from the West Coast. I was raised by a cowboy on a ranch, and I had never, met anybody like Matt. And Matt introduced me to music. He bought me my first, what we called a boombox back then, and cassette player, and bought like 10 cassettes for me and said, you need to listen to this. This is Led Zeppelin. This is The Who. This is the Rolling Stones. I didn't know who any of that stuff was. So he was so far ahead of, from an artistic standpoint, musically and artistically. His father was a painter. He liked museums. I'll never forget when we were in New York auditioning. He said to me, after work today, come with me. We're going to go have a pie. And I was like, I love pie. I love apple pie. We get there, they're having pizza. I'm like, this is not pie. What are you talking about, right? So He taught me a lot, and people ask me, like, what was your favorite part of making The Outsiders? And of course, it was the relationships formed, and I had already known Patrick. And my father sent me to the set alone, and when I say alone, there was a paid guardian to watch me, but my parents didn't come, and that was intentionally done because we didn't have parents as Curtis brothers, and My father trusted the process, and of course he knew Patrick very well, and he could call up his mother and say, take care of my son, and they really looked after me.
Wow.
So it was the bond between the actors was built from the very beginning, and Francis was the architect behind that, and knew exactly what he was doing the whole time.
Just went so far beyond movie making. I can tell it still impacts you to this day. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Another audience question here?
All your anecdotes so lead into my next question, so it's great.
And your name and where you're from?
Joe, I'm from New York, so I knew
Right on.
I knew what your friends meant when they said hi.
Hi.
So you got to play one of my favorite characters of all time. You got to be Professor Zoom, and the reason I'm
That's the Reverse Flash, an animated piece.
and he's fantastic because he's like no redeeming quality. He's like DC's biggest SOB.
Yeah.
And one, how much fun was that? And two, like, how do you, like, as an actor, like, this guy has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Like, just how do you just delve into just like the biggest bastard DC ever created?
So, first of all, I love playing villains, and I spent most of my career as a child just kind of playing these teenage roles, and then never was offered a villain until I played the character of George Foyet, the Reaper on Criminal Minds. And when they cast me in that role, a lot of times as an actor, you might not know what you are going to do, but you damn sure know what you're not going to do. So at least for me, that gives me a leg up. And when I was 17, I did a movie called The Hitcher with Rutger Hauer. And Rutger was probably the most intimidating man that I had ever met. His hands were the size of a baseball mitt. And when we started filming The Hitcher, the production was petrified of this man. Like, nobody would speak to him. And about 3 weeks in, he finally came up to me and said, I think we should have lunch together today. And I was like, holy shit. Okay. So I grabbed my little tray and went to his, he had this bus that he was basically living on. And we sat down, and he would chain smoke these filterless Camel cigarettes, and I was picking through some potato salad, and it felt like an eternity went by. And he wasn't saying anything. He was just sort of staring out the window and smoking, occasionally glancing over at me, and I was scared to death. And so, out of just absolute terror, at 17 years old, I decided to muster up a little small talk, and with my squeaky voice, I was like, Rutger, everybody says you're an amazing bad guy. What's your secret to playing bad guys? He took this long drag off his cigarette and leaned in real close and exhaled in my face and said, I don't play bad guys. I was like, holy shit, time to go. And that rattled around in my head for 25 plus years. Of course, I didn't have the depth at that time artistically to understand what he meant until I got the role as Foyet. And I started to reflect upon what he had said, and I was old enough to understand different aspects of the work at that point. When you're 17, irony isn't something you have a real grasp on, and Rutger, I started to really analyze his roles, and what he meant was he would play very grounded characters, and he wasn't afraid to, like, when you watch The Hitcher, he really empathizes with Jim Halsey and what he puts my character through. You see love, you see fear, you see a lot of emotion from what we would call a bad guy, that, a lot of actors make the mistake of not emoting because they know that they don't die until page 92, and they'll run through a hail of bullets. And my favorite to watch is when a bad guy is in like the most frightening moment, and they decide to laugh in your face in that moment. I'm like, I'm out, click. Because it's fake. I don't care who you are. If you're getting shot at, you're freaking scared, man. It doesn't matter who you are, right? So it was really important to me when I played Foyet to And I love it when people come up to say, I saw you as the Reaper, you're a freaking psycho, man. I'm like, well, really? You should watch it again, because you see a pretty grounded person that's trying like a mother to make a deal with somebody because he's afraid. And he does horrible things, but as a very grounded, rooted character. And that is frightening when you start to watch, a sociopath that can disconnect from murdering 40 people on a bus, like he just sat down, having a hamburger, without needing to come up with some fake laugh or some, what I call bullshit, while doing it. And it took me about 25 years to understand that, and I finally understood what he meant when he said, I don't play bad guys. He doesn't approach his villains as if they're bad guys. He finds a way to inject this character that does horrible things with humanity. And what happens is the audience then can connect to you, and they don't disconnect from you, but they understand, and then they hate you even more. So many people come up to me and go, oh my God, I hated you so much in Criminal Minds, but you're my favorite character. It's like, I hate you, but I love you. And that to me is like, the ultimate compliment. And that came from Rutger. So I really love to play flawed, broken humans and present them to the audience, and the audience like, I hate this guy. I played a character, on Southland for 5 years who was a misogynistic, kind of sort of partially racist, alcoholic, old school cop. And in the first season, you literally hate this guy, but by season 5, you love him. And that to me, something like that really challenges me as an artist, and those are my favorite characters to play. And that all came from that experience from The Hitcher, though I didn't know it until 25 years later. So
lessons all through. I mean, I've talked to so many actors before who have played some, bad guys, and they say that you can't play the baddie because that character doesn't know what they're doing is quote unquote bad. It's just what they think needs to be done in that moment. Yeah. And when you approach it that way, then otherwise you become the mustache twirling cartoon character. And like you said, turn it off. I can't watch it. It's time. Yeah, I need something else. But and it sounds like you've got the emotional investment from the audience at that point too. When they just can't turn away, but they hate it, but they can't turn away. Yeah. You've got them locked in. Got another question here? Yep.
Hi. I'm Drew. I'm also from New York. I'm a big fan of American history, so I absolutely loved your performance as Lieutenant Thomas Chamberlain in Ronald F. Maxwell's
Gettysburg. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like Outsiders, you got to work with a great cast, and I just kind of wanted to know, what was your prep work like? Are there any great stories that you wouldn't mind sharing?
Well, playing historical characters now is phenomenal because you have the internet. Mm-hmm. Back then, we didn't have the accessibility that we do now. But we did have historians that came on the set. And again, we would sit around the fire in these reenactment camps that were built that was possibly one of the most incredible experiences I've ever been a part of, because these gentlemen would come from around the country, and it was a 5-month shoot, and they would come for weeks at a time. The camp never broke down. New people would come, people would come and go the whole time, but we would have fiddle players and people making food from that time period, and literally that's where we all would love to go when we were on a break and sit down and listen to the historians. Of course, every reenactor on the planet is a historian, so you got to deal with that. But the stories about the Civil War, whatever side you're a fan of, and when I did that movie, of course I was a fan of the Union. Now, having read every possible book and memoirs from Robert E. Lee to Ulysses S. Grant, everybody, I'm more partial to what the South went through and the stories from the South, because both sides thought it was going to be at max a 3-month war. And it went on for 4 years, as you know. And the stories, it's funny because truth is stranger than fiction, you know, and we can have this conversation over and over, and I can tell you a story and be like, wait, brothers were fighting each other? You know, there was, on a Christmas Eve, there was a battle taking place, and both sides decided to take a break, and they came out and played a baseball game. And then at the end of the game, they both went back to their sides and started shooting at each other again. So, you know, you hear like, wait, what? That sounds crazy to me. But you do the research and you find out that, you know, these moments really took place. The humanity that went into the Civil War, and the brutality of how they bulked together and just fired lead at each other left and right, it was mind-blowing. But getting back to your point, we didn't have the research of it. We didn't have these, you know.
Right.
Now you play a historical part, you got all the answers right here, which tends to help a lot. But what we were talking about earlier, it omits the camaraderie of storytelling and listening, which I'm a big fan of. Yeah. Thank you, man.
Oh, no.
I want to jump back a little because you referenced your dad earlier. He was a stunt coordinator, stuntman, rodeo performer?
Yeah, he rode bulls for 10 years for a living.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you grew up in Los Angeles, you grew up in the industry. At any point, did you think that might be where you wanted to go a little bit?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be a cowboy. And in fact, I live on a ranch now. I have 3 horses.
Now you get to be one, which is
right
good.
every day. Yeah, so I'm a cowboy now.
Okay, in real life and on screen.
But for me, well, so you have to understand, back in the day, all stunt people were cowboys because they were doing westerns, right? And they're like, okay, we need somebody to fall off the stagecoach, and you know, that's pretty much all stunt people were cowboys. Yeah. So my father, when it was time to kind of settle down a little bit, he went to L.A. and started working in the business. He wanted to become a stunt person, and he did. He was one of the most prolific stuntmen in the business for many, many, many years. He's 78 now and retired, but when I was younger, you know, rodeo was such a big part of my life. Junior rodeo, I was 1979, 1980, 1981 California State junior all-around champion. I really wanted to be a professional cowboy. Wow. And, you know, doing ET, even doing The Outsiders, was just a means for me to get a faster horse and a bigger truck and a trailer to get to the next rodeo.
It was all about that.
Yeah, and then it sort of kind of snowballed into this, you know, career that I never anticipated. You know, and I was a self-taught actor and just never really thought that I would be a lifer by any, you know, it's not like I went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and studied through college, you know, I was curious,
like, when did that sneak in then? Was it in high school? Was it, like, when did...
No, I mean, literally I was,
acting?
It's funny, so, I was laying on the floor one day waiting for my father to come home, and, you know, back then we walked home from the school bus and you know, we let ourselves into the house and we hung out for hours by ourselves, you know.
Kid. Yep, I know. Yep.
And I was watching an old episode of Taxi. I was like, you know, 8 or 9 years old, and there was a scene between Judd Hirsch and Jeff Conley. Judd Hirsch was talking to Conley's character, who was an actor in the show, and he wanted to have a couple hours off to go to this audition, and Danny DeVito wouldn't let him go. And he blew up and got mad, and he went home, and Judd Hirsch knocks on his door and says, you know, can I come in and talk to you? And he says, yeah, sure. And he starts talking to Conley's character, saying, look, you know, you need to give up this dream of being an actor and, you know, take life a little more seriously. I don't want to see you being a taxi driver your whole life. You're a young man, and you need to, you know, become something and do something that has substance to it. And Conley freaks out on him, and he starts to tell him, how dare you come over to my house and shatter my dreams? How dare you tell me that I can't do what I know I can do better than anybody? And he storms out of his own apartment and slams the door and leaves Judd Hirsch like in this sort of mesmerized trance. And slowly the front door opens back up, and it's Conley going, I got you, right? And for me, at a young age, it was this beautiful illustration of what acting was.
Okay.
And it really hit me deep in that moment. I was
From
like,
episode of Taxi, that's
episode of
fantastic.
Taxi. And I was like, okay, this is something that I think I want to do, because I was going to the set with my father and thinking I'd probably do stunts. But when I understood what acting was, at that time, I thought, okay, this is something I could do. And of course, out of the blue one day, my father picks me up from school and says, we're going to go meet this guy named Steven Spielberg. And I hadn't been on any auditions, and I was like, okay, cool. And he shoves a pack of Marlboros in my hand and a book of matches. He says, you have to learn how to smoke this. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, turning green, trying to learn how to smoke a cigarette as we're on our way to this audition. And we go into the casting room, and there's 6 guys. They all look identical. They all look like, John Stamos with black feathered hair and beautiful blue eyes. And I was like, Daddy, let's go, because I am not that, and I'm not going to get this part. And he said, just wait. So they all went in one at a time. And finally, it's my turn to go in. And I walk in, and there's, I'm sitting on a stool, and there's bright lights pointing at my face, and there's Kathleen Kennedy, Frank Marshall, the producers of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Steven Spielberg, and Mike Fenton, Marcy Liroff, all these casting people, and a couple of other suits. And Spielberg starts asking me some questions. He asks, if I can ride a bike. I'm like, of course I can ride a bike. He's like, your father's a stuntman? I'm like, yeah. Stunt person, I have horses, we rodeo, and hands me a page, and we weren't allowed to read the script. It was top secret, so right. I had this page of dialogue that they've torn out of a script for me, and I read a few lines with him, and he said, how do you feel about smoking a cigarette? And I was like, hold on. Pulled out this rumpled pack of Marlboros, stuck a bent cigarette in my mouth, and started striking a match. He was like, okay, kid, you got the part.
Your dad knew. Did he have the script ahead of? I mean,
nobody did. Nobody did. Well,
somebody tipped him off.
No, of course. So the role had been cast already.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was a young Mormon boy who they had cast, and his mother came and said, well, he can't smoke the cigarette. Wow. And so they said, we're going to replace you.
So he knew why.
And so it was like, we need a young kid that will do this.
Oh, man.
And he starts in a week. So it was completely by fate.
What timing? I mean, yeah.
And my father,
and ended up in one of the biggest.
Well, what happened was my father had a commercial agent, and my father was the Marlboro Man for 5 minutes, and he'd done a lot of commercials, a Nescafe commercial and a few things. Well, that commercial agency had a theatrical department, and I had gone in with him a few times while he had some meetings, and they called to my father and they said, listen, there's a part that we think Tommy might be right for. Can you bring him in? And they explained to him what he needed, and of course he just stopped and picked up a pack of Marlboros and crammed one in my mouth and said, learn how to smoke this.
Dad knew.
And,
that's amazing. And the time we have left, I do want to fanboy just a bit about E.T. a little bit, because, I mean, you and I are the same age. It's like, that's my sweet spot right
We're
there.
old.
I mean, yeah, but I was riding bikes. I was doing the whole thing, and it was everything. And it was just like, had you known at that point, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Jaw, like, had you kind of known that, or was this, you're learning that as you're going, and there's this guy named Steven Spielberg there?
I didn't know him, I didn't know Coppola.
Okay.
And I think that gave me an advantage.
A distance.
Because I didn't want anything from them.
Yeah.
I wanted to compete in rodeo.
Okay.
I wanted to go home and ride my horse.
Yeah.
And there were other people that were there that wanted to be a star. And I, still to this day, I don't give a shit. I don't have a publicist. They call me and say, do you want them? I'm not going to pay some clown $4,000 a month to get me in people's picks and pans. I don't give a shit. So,
but you think that distance is what's helped you all these years?
Yeah.
Just like, oh my God, like now there's a believability to
well,
that.
I feel sort of, I empathize for the people that spend a lifetime in Hollywood that may or may not be happy with their particular station in life. Hollywood's a fickle bitch, I'm sorry. But, it's like the girl that you chase around the playground in school for months and begging her to go to the dance, or, wanting to hold her hand and possibly get a kiss behind the handball court. She wants literally nothing to do with you until you finally stop. And she's like, wait, where are you going? Hollywood's the same way. You can spend a lifetime chasing that dream, but I live in a small town in Texas. I could give a shit, if you call me or not. I'm going to go ride my horse. Work in the garden or do something for my heart and my soul. Well, my phone never stops ringing, and I'm not concerned about becoming famous. I'm more concerned about growing as an artist and becoming a better person. And when you focus on that, the outcome is a beautiful gift. If you're focused solely on trying to get your next role, inevitably you're going to be disappointed.
I think that's the believability that comes out in your performances too. When I can only imagine how much fun that was to shoot that movie, E.T.
Well, it was like a circus, right? Because you're surrounded by little people, people with severe disabilities. This little kid named Matt had no legs, and he used to cruise around on a skateboard, and they'd put him inside this E.T. suit.
In the E.T. suit, right?
I'm 13, going, holy shit, what's going on?
Right.
And of course the actual puppeteering of E.T. There was 12 people doing the mechanics, and of course now they would just computer generate
CGI,
all the images.
You lose all the you lose everything.
And you
guys,
there was an inevitable. Literally, you would be in awe watching, like they'd be wheeling out the ET in front of you, and you'd be like, oh my God.
Like Drew Barrymore totally bought in as a kid, I think, right? Like she was like, people were weeping when he died.
Henry as well.
Henry comes back though. But it's like they were weeping on the set.
Yeah.
And I think Spielberg probably did a little, freaked him out a little bit.
Well, there was a tremendous amount of love on that set. And it was so surreal, but still steeped in reality.
Yeah.
It could have, it was a very simple story. It could have been a little boy and a dog. But the fact that we had this introduction to a benevolent extraterrestrial was something we hadn't experienced. It had been, kind of War of the Worlds land for us. And now all of a sudden, our hearts were bleeding for this sort of, Reese's Pieces eating little character. And imagine that guy, because they went to M&M's first and said, we want you to be our candy, and M&M said no.
Nope.
And that guy got fired.
Yep.
And
He's selling cars.
Nobody likes Reese's Pieces, but we all eat them now because of that.
That's
right?
exactly
It's
right.
Crazy.
No, the movie still gets to me. I think it's all of us to this day, too. Next up is Reagan. You're playing Secretary of Defense Casper Weinberger?
Yeah, that's coming out here in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. Amazing experience.
Dennis Quaid?
Dennis Quaid and Penelope Ann Miller played Nancy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's a long story that's based more on the life of Reagan. And I play Casper Weinberger, and basically during the Cold War, and, my scenes are all sort of based in that top secret office giving orders. But the story is more about Reagan and his span over the years than just that particular political moment. Okay. I've done a couple of pictures with Penelope. Both of them are fantastic to work with. Again, you're talking about playing a historical character, and Casper Weinberger had a kind of a shady ending to his political career and his life. We don't need to get into that. But for me to bite into that moment and present that work was great. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that process.
We're looking forward to that. You're here all weekend. Everything we've talked about and even more is now at your table. You're going to be having conversations with everybody. You're going to be signing things.
Come on
talk
over.
about
Come on
everything.
over.
my goodness, we go on and on about your career forever, but
Well,
we
thank you all
for
thank you, but most importantly, thank you all for coming.
yes, and
Appreciate
support all
it,
these
yeah.
years. Thank you so much. C. Thomas Howell, everybody.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much.
Y'all have a great weekend.